here's one by Trump MD on the BLM Effect. He said, "Nice video. Any way I can contact you? Would like to share thoughts." And I said, thanks. There are links in the description to Discord and Twitter. So those are the best places to have a discussion with me. Like if you want to just do it in text, Twitter DMs, or Discord. And I can talk in voice on Discord or Skype. So anyway, he did contact me and we did have a discussion. Okay, here's one by Tenman X on the BLM Effect. He said, "Dude, your Oh, this is pretty funny. This is like a stereotype of the angry commenter. He said, "Dude, your feckless attempt at propaganda masquerading as analysis is mind-numbingly asinine. There is no excuse for your ignorance of how simple statistics works in context, except when viewed as a sad commentary on the appalling state of secondary school education in the U.S. And I said, "What a devastating counter-argument. Just admit that you have no rational arguments. Your religion is wrong. Accept it and move on with your life." And then he said, "Just because any moron, like a parrot, is able to mimic humanoid terms like devastating counter-argument or rational arguments is not reason enough to waste energy presenting them with something clearly beyond their grasp. Your assertions are undeserving of anything beyond derision or scorn. Accept that and move on with your life." That's funny because he's accusing me of being a parrot, and then in the same paragraph, he parrots what I had just said. Anyway, then he said, "Meanwhile, learn yourself some basic statistics, mate, before inflicting further simple-minded generalizations on the public." Well, I mean, I kind of went a bit beyond basic statistics. But you really don't need to know any statistics to understand that the murder rate went up by 30%. You can just look at the graph. And really all I did there was present data, aggregate data. So yeah. Anyway, I said, "Lol, you have no actual criticisms or arguments to make. You just want to rant. I get it." So yeah. Okay, here is a comment by Kayla H. on the Ghost of Adam Lanza. She said, "Thank you so much for your detailed and thoughtful analysis. I agree completely with your perspective on Lanza. Thank you for your insight." So that's a really nice comment. It's nice to get those positive comments. So thank you, Kayla H. I'm glad you found the video interesting. All right, here's one by Foxxy Grandpa on Atheism Theism Discussion. Now this is a little bit hard to understand maybe, but I'm just going to read it. Hopefully you understand what he's saying. He said, "Puzzling how arguments about the particularity of objects is used as a case for the impossibility of their convergence." And then in quotes, "If my brain and your brain are particulars and not partaking in some kind of universal, then how can there possibly be congruence between them?" End quote. Then he said, "We have factories that are pumping out millions of products that use interlocking parts. These objects are all discrete particulars, and yet they are so congruent that they can be interchanged seamlessly. My car battery is so similar in structure to a billion other car batteries that I can swap them out and the car will still perform the same. I can say to someone, 'You need to clean the battery terminals,' and they will not act as if I have uttered a mystery, even though my terminals are not the same exact object as theirs. This is what our brains are like. We each have our own particular concepts that are induced from experience, and there is enough congruence that they can appear to be universals and not particulars. Yeah, we have similar brains and we live in the same world, and those brains interact with the world in the same ways, so we're naturally going to induce the same concepts. And then also we're in communication with each other, and that also brings those concepts into greater congruence, or you could say it causes them to converge, because we're using them not only to think but also to communicate. There's really no mystery about it, but some people want to present it as some huge mystery so they can then claim that God somehow solves the mystery. But yeah, it's silly. All right, here is one by Doom Grifter on debunking the revolutionary phenotype. He said, "Your problem is personal, I can tell. Though you could be right, I have no idea. But I can tell you personally dislike JF, which is probably why you did this video in the first place." Well, no, I did the video because, and I think I explained in the video why I did the video. So maybe if you'd listened to it, you would know why I did the video. But I think you just really need to come up with some explanation for how somebody could disagree with the great JF, rather than, if you're not even interested in the ideas, why would you even click on the video if you have no basis for judging the ideas themselves? But anyway, no, that video came about in the following way. Fathom, somebody who was a fan of JF's book and also a follower of mine, he came onto my Discord server and he kept saying, "You must read this book, it's great, blah, 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 blah." So he was really trying to, sell the book on me. And I said, "No, I know why it's wrong. It's not worth reading. I don't want to waste my time." And he kept saying, "Oh, you must read it." And then I said, "Look, I'll tell you what. I know that it's wrong, and I know why it's wrong, based just on, the few little blurbs I've seen from it. But if you want to make the argument to me, if you want to present the arguments that are in the book, the ideas that are in the book, I will debunk them in real time, and I don't even have to read the book before I do that. I'm just going to debunk them as you present them. So if you're willing to present them, I'm not willing to read the damn book, but if you're going to present the ideas to me, then I will rebut them in real time." So we did that. Then JF saw that video and he tweeted about it. And then we ended up agreeing to debate on his show. So for that, I actually read the book. And we had that little debate. And then, because I had already gone through the trouble of reading the book and making notes on it, and, basically going over all the different ways that it was wrong, I decided to make a blog post about that. And that's what that video is. It's just me reading the blog post and sort of rambling over it, half reading, half rambling. So that's how it came about. I had no particular dislike of JF at the time. I had no real interest in his ideas. I thought they were wrong, but I didn't really care that much. And I've never really been motivated by animus toward him. And I don't particularly like him. But it wasn't me really even who instigated this. It was other people coming to me who were pushing the ideas on me that kind of forced me to respond to them. Right? Because I had really no interest in reading the book or talking about JF's ideas at all. And people still have been coming to me. About a year ago, it wasn't even a year ago, that guy came to me and wanted to talk about the ideas, wanted to re-argue the argument, and so I went through it again. But and then I had that other little discussion with JF. So no, but whatever. It gives us more copium. If you can't make an argument, you really shouldn't make a comment on a video that is presenting ideas and making arguments. All right, here is one by Joan Bro on how I became amoral. And I'm going to assume this is a guy, but it might be I don't know, could be a girl. Joan sounds like a girl, but Bro sounds like a guy. I'm going to say guy. He said, "Hello, mate. This video opened my eyes to the absurdity and nonsense of human behavior. This drove me to elaborate my own philosophy, focused on skepticism and existentialism. So now I'm studying my second year of philosophy degree just to consolidate my views on life. After I finish, I would like at some point to write a book where I can explain my thoughts, since I cannot expect people around me to understand my ideas. Hopefully some reader would. And then he said, thanks for that. And I said, good luck with your degree. I get a lot of comments on that video. All right, here's one by Dave Skeet on Plan B for the Deep State. He said, most of the things you were talking about in this video came to pass in some way or another. The deep state coup, the Pizzagate stuff, the election being disputed. It might not have come to pass in the way that you believed at the time, but you have a good sense for this stuff. Yeah, it's kind of funny, like, at the time, I was thinking, because of the media narrative, that they were planning to sort of depose Trump, come up with some kind of legal maneuver to prevent him from being the president. And they did that, but it was like a 4-year process, right? Like the deep state coup was like a 4-year process, not a quick process. As for Pizzagate, widely dismissed now as some kind of crazy conspiracy theory, of course, always presented in the most extreme form, always presented as this guy went to this pizza place and shot into the ceiling and all that, rather than people had questions about these emails. But, there's Jeffrey Epstein, right? So that's pretty damn good evidence that, yes, there is sexual blackmail at the highest levels of the global elite. And so, yeah, there are strings being pulled behind the scenes. Nobody knows what goes on behind the curtain, right? It's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the, short term, because it depends so much on things that are hidden from us. But we can see general trajectories, general themes, and stuff like that. Anyway, he said, what are some important things to predict now? And I really don't have a good answer for that. Like, if you're talking near term, I could probably make some off-the-cuff predictions, like they will probably find some new crisis to replace the COVID thing. The media will try to pretend COVID never happened, I guess. They'll never admit that they were wrong about anything or that the reactions were wrong. They'll just sort of, sweep it into the trash bin of history, or try to. But, yeah, I don't know. Let me think about it. I don't have any, good short-term predictions right now. And I don't think I'm very good at making them. I can understand thematically what's going on, but I can't understand specifically what's going on, what exactly is going to happen. Because I just don't have the information. Yeah, sorry, I wish I could give a better answer, but I just don't have any good predictions in the short term right now. But I will think about it. And thanks for your comment. Okay, here is a series of comments on how I became amoral by Jacqueline Entwhistle. And I'm going to read these in the order she made them. She said, so sick, hunting, fishing is just as wrong. All animals are feeling sentient beings, suffer, feel pain. Animals want to live. Why would you want to hunt, kill living sentient beings? If I accidentally tread or kill insects, I feel terrible bad for them. Yeah, well, I do. I feel bad for insects too if I step on them. I try not to. Even when I walk on the beach, I try not to step on, too many barnacles or whatever. But I also understand that life is, in a sense, stepping on barnacles. We are energy consumers and entropy producers, and we necessarily have a negative impact on other living beings by our existence. And yeah, when I was young, I did a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I did, some hunting and fishing, and yeah, I killed animals, and not for fun, but because, I guess, to get the experience, and also we did eat a lot of wild food. I guess you could say I lived kind of out in the country in a sense, and in a small town in the middle of British Columbia, and, we ate a lot of, especially fish. We had a lot of fish that we caught. We ate ducks in the in the fall, deer, we hunted for various animals and ate them. So yeah, but it was never done for sport. It was always done for food. But, I don't believe in morality, so I don't think it's wrong or right to kill animals for any reason in some objective sense. But yeah, personally, I don't like killing animals. I don't really get any pleasure from it. And I do feel bad for the living beings that get hurt by my existence. Like, not that much. I mean, I don't obsess about it. But yeah, if I can, like if a spider is in the house, I'll put it outside. I won't just squash it. But I don't think I'm doing something objectively good by doing that. It's just a preference. It's just, that's my nature, I guess. I just don't like killing spiders, I feed the hummingbirds, and I like, watching them, and I worry about them in the winter. But again, I don't think that this is some kind of great virtue or that this is objectively good. It's just my preference. I just, have this quirk of my personality that I just like doing that. All right, then she said, bringing kids to existence causes a lot of harm, suffering, death. I'm antinatalist and vegan, both go hand in hand. And then she said, you make good points and makes sense. I agree. At the end of that, which I don't understand, because it seems like she's coming at this from like a moralistic position, and then she's agreeing. So I really don't know. But thank you for your comments. Okay, and here's another sequence of comments on Platonic Dialog with Aarvoll by somebody called Dare to Dream. And I'll read them in the order he made them as well. And this is kind of like stream of consciousness mysticism, I would say. He said, there is no truth. And then he said, based on what we observe, the sun goes across the earth, and every season it changes its direction. I wouldn't say it changes its direction, it changes its inclination, but anyway. Then he said, at the same time, given the concept of truth exists, but there is no truth. All of life is a mystery. And then he said, no two entities share the same reality, so there can be no common truth. And yet there are common truths. Then he said, get out of duality thinking. And then finally he said, thought does not necessarily correspond to reality, though it most definitely corresponds. So yeah. By the way, if you're going to make a whole bunch of comments, put them on a single thread. Don't just make a whole bunch of separate comments, because then it clutters up the comment section for other people who just want to read, other comments or whatever. But anyway, yeah, I don't think there's much to say about that. It's just somebody being mystical. I guess I should just say, this is not philosophy, okay? Just like saying these kinds of things like, truth is truth, but it's also not truth. It's not profound. It's just like cargo cult philosophy, or pretending to do philosophy by saying things that sound kind of profound but don't really mean anything. Anyway, all right. Here is a dumb comment by Conundrum. But of course I shouldn't be surprised, because it's Conundrum. Although Conundrum is not that stupid, honestly. Like, to be honest, he's not an idiot, but he makes idiotic comments. Like, I think he has the ability to think a little more than he typically does, and he tends to just quickly make stupid comments, which are annoying. So this is an annoying, stupid comment by Conundrum. And this is on reply to IvanTheHeathen about knowledge. He said, I think that Ivan the commenter is right. This is how I interpret what's going on here. BG is using the correspondence theory of truth when he's stating that there is something called the brain, and this brain does this and that, like abstraction, compression of information, etc. Now, how can you believe that? What does that fucking mean? Are you saying that every time anybody makes any claim whatsoever, they are using the correspondence theory of truth? I mean, this is just, I don't know what to say. This just doesn't make any sense. Okay, no, I'm not using the correspondence theory of truth, which I explicitly reject, just because I have theories about the brain. Maybe Conundrum believes that the correspondence theory is a necessary presupposition of making truth claims, but if so, then he's very badly confused, and he should really think before he says something this asinine. Okay, anyway, then he said, only after that BG can even say what his spin on the pragmatic theory of truth is. Okay, yes, I have to have a theory of the brain, a theory of mind, I have to have theories to say things about things, yes, but that doesn't mean that I have to adopt the correspondence theory of truth, which is retarded. All right, anyway, then he said, and yes, BG's theory of truth is a pragmatic theory of truth, as it states that what is true is that which makes empirically verifiable predictions. And that's not what it states. It doesn't state that truth is what makes empirically verifiable predictions, because verifiable means that there's a process to determine if it's true. Right? So then truth would depend on truth in an infinite regress. And that's why pragmatic theories of truth are non-explanatory, because they have this infinite regress. You see, in science, that might be a reasonable way of saying what's scientific truth, because science can outsource the task of verifying predictions, of making observations, and things like that to the human brain. But the human brain cannot outsource the task of observing something to another brain, or making truth judgments to another brain, or to something else. Okay, so the buck stops with the brain. In science, a brain can observe something and use that as data for science. But we can't use propositions about reality as a basis for making truth judgments inside the brain, because propositions about reality are truth judgments, right? So that's why it's based on information compression, compressing the information of neurons that are in the brain. The brain can't use predictions about what is out there to verify or falsify its models, because it doesn't have access to an independent source of predictions of what is out there, right? It doesn't have access to direct reality. That's the whole point. So how can a brain know something about reality? Well, it kind of bootstraps that out of compressing the information of neurons, okay, which I've explained in that video, so I'm not going to do it again, but this is not what my theory of truth states. Conundrum did not listen to what I said. And then he said, at least that's the only charitable reading of Ivan's comments I can think of. And this also makes no sense, because a charitable reading of Ivan's comments really shouldn't be your source of information about what I'm saying and what I believe, right? That should be a charitable interpretation of what I say, not what Ivan says. So, what the fuck what was Conundrum even thinking when he wrote this? Anyway, then he says, BG's mention of homunculus, Platonic forms, and seeing the reality as it really is are all weird. And I don't see how they relate to anything Ivan was saying. Okay, so if you don't understand how they relate, and you think they're weird, maybe that's because you just don't understand what's going on here. Maybe you just don't understand the discussion, the issues, the questions, the theories, or really anything else that's being said. Maybe you're just, constructing some very bizarre straw man in your head. Has that ever occurred to you? Anyway, then he said, but note that I'm writing this without the context of the video Ivan is commenting under, as I simply don't remember what it was about in detail. But the thing is, the correspondence theory of truth doesn't require any homunculi or Platonic forms, so even though one person in that debate could have relied on these things, e.g. Platonic forms, they are definitely not needed to state the correspondence theory of truth. So, for example, the proposition, the cat is on the mat, is true according to the correspondence theory of truth, when in fact the cat is on the mat. Yes, that's a very simple formulation of it. And you can see how it is vacuous right there in that sentence. Anyway, then he said, and no homunculus or Platonic form is needed here. Well, something would be needed if you wanted it to actually work, but that's another story. Anyway, I responded, so I'll just read my response, but let me finish his comment. He said, learning of concepts and knowledge in general is not really the core issue when discussing theories of truth. And I responded saying, clueless as usual. You are like the Platonic ideal of the midwit. And then I quoted him saying, so for example, the proposition the cat is on the mat is true according to the correspondence theory of truth, when in fact the cat is on the mat. And I said, don't you see the vacuous circularity of that? In fact means truthfully. So it simply defines truth as truth, right? So we could just replace in fact with in truth, and then it would say the cat is on the mat is true when in truth the cat is on the mat. So it's utterly meaningless. It's purely circular and vacuous. It says nothing about the relationship between the reality out there and the idea in the mind, how they are related, how could they possibly correspond when they're totally different things, etc. It just ignores the entire question of truth and pretends that it somehow solves it with a vacuous circle by just begging the question. Anyway, and then I quoted him saying, learning of concepts and knowledge in general is not really the core issue when discussing theories of truth. And I said, no, that is the core issue, or part of it. The core issue is how a brain in a skull can have knowledge of the world outside the skull. Any theory of truth that isn't vacuous must explain concepts, ideas, and their relation to reality. All right. I have to suck on a throat lozenge because my throat is kind of sore, so that may make some annoying sounds, but hopefully it's not too bad. Okay, here is one by Torin McCabe on reply to IvanTheHeathen about knowledge. He said, if truth is out there, then I can understand wanting to have a grounding. But if truth is a judgment made by and inside brains, then the evolved brain, conscious experience, and embodied actions are the grounding, ontology, and metaphysics. Yeah, I like the way he put it. I don't really like the terms ontology and metaphysics. I think they're kind of bogus, but I really think we should just say philosophy. Maybe epistemology is okay if we're focused on knowledge, but I don't think metaphysics and ontology are very useful terms. But yeah, the grounding is the nature of the brain, and it exists in relation to a world. The brain is regular, the world is regular, they interact in regular ways. That is the grounding of knowledge. It doesn't come with a guarantee. The brain might not work. Reality might change tomorrow. We can't be absolutely certain about these things. There's always Cartesian skepticism, but we don't really have a choice either. We have brains that work in a certain way, and we inhabit a certain world, and we have to do the best we can in this condition. All right, he said, the brain is a decision-making machine, so it is a category error to think of that as a coherence, correspondent, or pragmatic theory of truth. The brain just makes decisions by comparing X to Y inside itself. How the brain constructs X, Y, and comparison is very interesting and utilizes heuristics like coherence, correspondence, etc. And when we are doing science, we will be more explicit in the models we use to measure and decide scientific truth. Our everyday decisions are much more messy, plural, heuristic, statistical, brain-like than the explicit scientific modeling. most people, when talking of philosophical theories of truth, tend to want to build it up from scratch rather than rely on the fact that the brain already is an engine of decision-making and truth-judging. Well, we still have to, we can't theorize outside of ourselves, but that also doesn't mean that we take the brain for granted. Building up a philosophical theory of truth is also building up a psychological theory. A lot of philosophy comes from simply recognizing or believing that you are a brain in a skull, right? And what are the implications of that? Well, the brain in a vat thought experiment is an example. Cartesian skepticism is an example. Although Cartesian skepticism can be arrived at purely by questioning your beliefs and saying, I can't seem to find the bottom. I can't seem to find the beliefs I can't question. Well, okay, maybe I can't question my own existence without being in a paradox, but that's not very much, right? So you have Cartesian or philosophical skepticism, but then you also have the skepticism that arises out of a psychological theory that the brain is, a bunch of neurons inside this organ that is inside a skull that is only connected to the world through nerves, and, any knowledge must either be resident in that brain, in the DNA or in the, original zygote from which the brain is descended, right? It's like all the cells in your brain came from an original cell, or it has been acquired from experience through neurons. And that's a great puzzle, right? How does that work? Well, there is a kind of knowledge that's in the brain, in the structure of the brain, which is mostly determined by DNA. And that is, basic mental processes, induction, attention, logic, I guess you could say, emotion, etc. And then that object that has this prior procedural knowledge in its structure, it could say structural knowledge, then is in contact with this bigger world through the senses and the muscles. The correlations within sensory data, the correlations between sensory and motor data, and the correlations between sensory, motor, and emotional data. So basically all of those types of data provide this brain with the raw material, the raw data, from which it can start inducing conceptual knowledge, which it then uses to navigate the world, basically. So that's a theory of knowledge, which is not, I guess you could say it's not starting from scratch, it's starting from a psychological position, a belief about the nature of the brain and its relation to the world. But it's also philosophical in that it examines the, belief states, and it takes into account the Cartesian skepticism, right? Like, it could be that this brain has within it certain indubitable truths that are somehow propositional that it could find. But Cartesian skepticism shows us that you really can't find such truths. You can't find these indubitable propositions. And that's the abyss. That's nihilism. Well, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but that's basically my view. Where I'm coming from, trying to construct a philosophical theory of knowledge that is coherent with a psychological theory of the human brain and its relation to the outside world. All right, he said, we can provide more tools to our decision-making, and as we build computers, we see implemented abstract decision-making. But what we are doing is enhancing and externalizing what already exists in our brain, rather than creating something from scratch or a Platonic external realm. Yeah, well, when we construct things like formal logic, geometry, mathematics, we are constructing things that are outside of our brains, but they reflect something about the brain, the way the brain works. And we can't start from nothing and develop a theory of knowledge. A theory of knowledge is inductive. It's not deductive. We're not deducing it from first principles. We are inducing it from data. We have data of how people behave. We have data about our own beliefs and how they relate to one another and how they relate to our experiences. All theories are inductive. All right, anyway, let's move on. Here is a comment by Kevin Solway on reply to IvanTheHeathen about knowledge. He said, I think you should crystallize your thoughts into 1 or 2 arguments and present them in no more than 10 minutes. If your arguments take more than an hour to explain, then you don't understand them yourself. This guy's such a jackass. This guy thinks he's some kind of guru genius. I looked at some of his crap on his website, and it's like a combination of Thus Spake Zarathustra and the Tao Te Ching. It's the pretense of knowledge, but not real knowledge. Anyway, I responded to him saying, number 1, there was a concise presentation of my theory of knowledge at the beginning of the video. Number 2, I was responding to long comment threads, so obviously I can't make a short response to them. Right? I mean, even if he didn't listen to the video, which he obviously didn't, the fucking thumbnail is a picture of a giant block of text. And that's what I was responding to. So do you really think I'm going to respond to a giant block of text with a 10-minute video? I mean, at the very least, I have to read the text, right? And there was a lot more than what was in the thumbnail. But even the thumbnail alone would take more than 10 minutes to read. All right, then I said, sorry, but profound knowledge can't be communicated in 10-minute cartoons. Real knowledge requires effort and intelligence. You can find plenty of 10-minute cartoons on YouTube, so don't waste my time complaining that my content isn't what you prefer. Here's one on the Ghost of Adam Lanza by Mushroom Lad. He said the channel was terminated like 24 hours after it was discovered. Lamau. Yeah, I know, it didn't last very long. It was there for 9 years and it was gone almost instantly. I'm not sure if that's because his parents asked for it to be taken down or if somebody else did, like law enforcement, government, or if YouTube just decided to do that, but yeah. But at least it was all backed up, archived, and it's going to be out there somewhere for a long time. Okay, on the BLM Effect, Bingo Babingo said, why do you think this false narrative is being pushed? And Torin McCabe responded, saying, I think it is less a false narrative and more a self-fulfilling prophecy. Progressives are certain that black people are oppressed, and thus, since they are oppressed, they should be acting out against their oppression. Conservatives will cope that the acting out mostly kills fellow blacks, but that cope does not disprove or even show strong evidence against the progressives' self-fulfilling prophecy of oppression and revolt. Well, I think mostly, if I'm going to answer the question myself, I would say it's mostly a crowd mania. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I don't think there's some kind of clever plan behind BLM. I think it's like one of these things that everybody is virtue signaling, and, it's a purity spiral. We've seen purity spirals in right-wing movements. You get purity spirals in the mass media, in like the established cultural space. They purity spiral. I mean, we've seen, I guess you could say we're in a period when we have crowd mania after crowd mania after crowd mania. Like, and this goes way back. Like in the 90s, there was the .com bubble, and then we had the housing bubble, and we had the post 9/11, moral hysteria about patriotism and freedom fries and all this bullshit. And then we had, the housing bubble, and then the crash that followed from that. Now we have the social justice bubble, the mass hysteria, and we have the COVID insanity. So really, we're going insane collectively because we don't have anything damping the insanity. Instead, we have feedback loops that are amplifying it. Like mass media and social media are acting as feedback loops to amplify insanity, to create delusions, and perpetuate them. And I talked about that in the video I made about the George Floyd incident and the riots. What was it called? The Madness of Crowds, maybe? Anyway, all right, let's move on. Torin McCabe on the BLM Effect said, Harvard and other elite universities should be relocated to poor black neighborhoods so they can experience the diversity that they evangelize. Yeah, well, eventually it'll come to them, but yeah, they are pretty sheltered. The elite are very sheltered from the effects of their virtue signaling. CM on the BLM Effect said, imagining the next 20 years in America is pretty depressing. Yep. In the world, it's pretty depressing. IOI on the madness of crowds said, such an underrated channel, it deserves more traction. Thank you. On Inmendham's Idiocy, QNTKKA said, well done. And on the Ghost of Adam Lanza, he said, culture is not irrational. It is a necessary byproduct of socialization. Lanza was a demented idiot. Well, no, culture is irrational because it propagates not by rational persuasion and not by conscious thought or conscious evaluation and acceptance, but by osmosis, by, conformity and obedience. So no, it's not rational. That doesn't mean it's bad. Yes, it is a necessary byproduct of socialization. And I said that. I said it was necessary and functional. And then calling Lanza a demented idiot doesn't really explain anything, right? So it's just a way to avoid thinking about the real reasons why he did what he did and his philosophy in general. He wasn't an idiot. He was quite smart. He wasn't demented in the normal sense of the word. He wasn't crazy. He was thinking quite clearly. And he posed challenges to established views that you don't have an answer to. And you don't want to think about them. So this is your cope. This is your defense. Well, he was just crazy. But yeah, that's all it is. It's not an explanation. It's a defense. Okay, here's a comment on JF Rage Quits, I Ramble by Foxy Grandpa. He said, in your video, Technology and Progress, you said, you are a colony of cells with the same DNA, and replicating that DNA is your body's purpose. When debating TRP, you seem to profusely reject the idea that the purpose of the phenotype is to replicate the genotype. I'll be charitable and assume that it was an old belief of yours and that you aren't adopting new beliefs to win a debate. You also said in a previous debate that the information of the genotype is the unit of selection, but in this talk you seem to be making the case that the life form in its entirety is the unit of selection. A clear statement of your model of evolution would be helpful. Okay, so I answered this. I said, yeah, I have used the phrase replicating your DNA or copying your genes instead of reproduction because those were in common usage. And at the time, I didn't see a really important distinction between them. Of course, there is a distinction, and it's very important in this debate. If we're talking about human beings, then the distinction between copy your genes and reproduce is not important. And especially if we're talking about your body being a colony of cells, it really is the DNA that binds them together, right? Now, obviously, they inherit other things. They inherit a little bit of cytoplasm and so on from the original cell. The whole cell is copied. You grow by cell division, not by gene replication or DNA replication. But it's the information of the DNA primarily that ties you together, makes you into a coherent body. Okay, so this is an important thing. DNA is important. And so it's not necessarily wrong to say replicating your DNA when you're talking about reproduction, because that's part of it. But in the context of the debate with JF, it is really important to understand that reproduction is not just replicating DNA. It is creating a new organism that goes through a new life cycle. Okay. Anyway, all right. I said, if we're talking about human beings, then the distinction between copy your genes and reproduce is not important. In almost every case, the former implies the latter. If we're talking about the evolution of DNA as a storage medium or abiogenesis, then it's a very important distinction. My understanding that the unit of reproduction is the unit of selection goes way back. You can see it in Bees Are Not Social, a blog post I put out in 2014. I rejected the notions of kin selection and inclusive fitness at the time. And in Careful Speech, I say that we are selected to reproduce, or for reproductive fitness, not to copy our genes or advance genetic interests. So this is really the important thing, right? The body does not exist to serve the genes, to replicate the genes. The genes are not the unit of meaning or purpose in biology. It is the complete phenotype. It is the reproducing unit that is the unit of purpose, because that's what reproduces. When you reproduce, you create a new human being. You don't just copy genes. Anyway, I will eventually write up something specifically about this. Okay, I said my engagement with TRP caused me to elaborate on my views and make them more explicit, but I already had the basic understanding, and that is why I initially told Fathom that the book was wrong and not worth reading. I started explicitly talking about the phenocentric view with Fathom back in 2018, and in fact there was a blog post I put out before that called Sex, Death, and Complexity that explains that is sort of based on that phenocentric view. I didn't adopt the belief to win a debate. The debate came from the belief and Fathom's insistence. However, even if I had, it would make no difference to its truth, right? So even if I had just adopted the belief to win a debate against JF, that wouldn't make the belief wrong or JF right. But that's not what happened. Okay, I said selection applies to the reproducing unit. Individual genes don't replicate by themselves. They replicate as part of a bigger unit. So genes are not the unit of selection. They are not selfish, as Dawkins has proposed. There are some rare cases in which a gene can be selected to replicate at the expense of the whole, in which case it is like a virus. Competition between X and Y chromosomes is an example. So basically, because the Y chromosome replicates as a unit, and the X chromosome often does, they can be selected to have effects on the body that only benefit the chromosome rather than the phenotype as a whole. Like, let's say something on the Y chromosome that suppresses sperm that are X, have an X chromosome. Like, there might be a way to do that, in which case, so that the male would produce only Y chromosome spermatozoa, because the sperm compete to fertilize the egg, and so there is a potential there for some kind of selection based on that competition. And so it is possible for genes to, or in this case a chromosome, to sort of have independent reproductive interests, but it's a very rare exception to the general principle. Okay, so anyway, I'll discuss these more when I do a proper blog post on this. I said such examples are very rare and do not imply that the gene is the unit of selection. At some point, I will at least write up an explanation of the phenocentric view. I started recording a critical reading of the selfish gene, in which I pointed out Dawkins' errors. There are surprisingly many of them. I'm not sure I will finish it because I have other things to do, but I might eventually. And then he said, "Thanks for the quality reply. I pretty much agree with you. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the unit of selection debate and surrounding topics for a while now, and I have come to the same conclusion about a lot of it. The gene's eye view gives some interesting insights into some mundane areas like extended phenotypes, intragenomic conflict, and green beard genes, but the gene as the unit of selection has too many problems for me to reconcile. A decent read that makes the case against a purely gene-centered view rather self-evident is Extended Heredity. JF claims that he sets out to explain truths about all replicating phenomena, which accounts for his overextended definition of phenotype, for example, but he ends up only really describing multicellular life. His phenotypic forgetfulness law doesn't apply well to protists, to name a single flaw. Yeah, I agree. Alright. On JF Rage Quits, I Ramble, Foxy Grandpa said, "One issue with JF's idea that I think gets rid of most of the hypothesis is that he doesn't distinguish between the information coded in the genes and the substrate that the information is within. He believes that a phenotypic revolution is an occasion where the genes aren't selfish because a new substrate would then be encoding the information. The problem is that Dawkins never made the case that DNA is the selfish unit. He wrote explicitly in the extended phenotype that it is not the DNA that is selfish, but the information that is stored in the DNA. In a revolutionary phenotype, the information is selfishly evolving into a new medium where it is more successful at propagating. Thus, there is no contradiction with this event and Dawkins' selfishness." Well, let me just point out that selfishly evolving is kind of a misleading metaphor in itself. Like, let's take a hypothetical gene in this hypothetical early organism, and let's say that this gene encodes for some enzyme that, I don't know, plays some role in the metabolism of the organism. I don't know what that would be, but let's say it's involved in ATP synthesis or something. It codes for a protein that is connected to ATP synthesis. I'm just making this up, okay? It doesn't really matter. Now, this enzyme, the gene for this enzyme might be copied with higher fidelity if the information is stored in DNA instead of RNA. But the enzyme has no effect on whether DNA or RNA is the storage medium, right? You could say, using Dawkins' language, that it benefits from being in a more high-fidelity storage medium, but it isn't selected to do that, right? Because it has no effect on the storage medium. So it's only selected to produce the enzyme that does the ATP synthesis. So although I take your point, and yes, JF mixes up these things, what happens in evolution is that there is a mutation that creates new information and then is selected for, that new information is selected for, meaning the number of copies containing that information increases. So that's what happened, and in this case, the new information was not stored in a sequence of nucleotides, but in the structure of the cell. Well, I mean, maybe it was to some extent in nucleotides because maybe the switch from RNA to DNA involved a new protein that catalyzed a new reaction. So maybe it wasn't in the nucleotide sequence. But again, it's stored in the phenotype, really. It's stored in the holistic cell. The cell contains information as a whole that is passed on to the daughter cells when it replicates. So anyway, I just want to make that point that you don't explain the emergence of a new storage medium in terms of it being beneficial to the existing genes. You can only explain it as a mutation that was selected for, right? It's not like a teleological thing that the genes somehow created this, built a new machine to propagate themselves. It's simply that mutation was selected for. So I'm just pointing this out, like this is an example of how you have to think very carefully about these things and not fall into this trap of thinking about them as being driven by agency or purpose in that sense. Okay, anyway, he said, it's possible for humans to move toward a beehive way of living in some hypothetical future, but this wouldn't refute the selfish gene theory any more than extant beehives do. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess more to the point of the book, if humans started using computers as the primary storage medium for the information that is in DNA, and if we started printing DNA, printing zygotes using computers, it would not imply that we would become the slaves of robots, right? This is like a huge leap, right? This doesn't make any sense. It's just a metaphorical confusion. You know, even the like phenotypic servitude concept is a flawed metaphor, but even that concept does not imply this macro level relationship in which the medium of inheritance suddenly becomes the, I don't know what to call it, the avatar of the being or something, right? That if computer storage was the medium of inheritance, the prime medium of inheritance, that then we would be the slaves of robots. I mean, this just does not make sense. Anyway, then he said, JF has some other interesting ideas in the book, but he sticks hard on it being a refutation of the selfish gene when it isn't. Yeah, I should put together a refutation of the selfish gene. Maybe I'll try to do that, because it is kind of a bogus concept. Anyway, he said genes do not equal DNA. DNA versus quantome does not equal genes versus quantome. What is the quantome? Is the quantome JF's idea of like quantum level evolution or replication or something? Yeah, I think this is just like an infinite regress, because some people don't understand emergence. They don't understand that new types of order emerge at like, you know, out of complexity at lower levels. So he's trying to trace biology all the way down to the quantum level. And Dawkins did something similar in The Selfish Gene. He talked about an early stage of life in which molecules replicated themselves directly. And I don't believe this ever existed. I don't think there ever was a replicating molecule. I think only cells have ever been replicating, have ever been replicators. You could say viruses are replicators, but they need cells to do it. And I don't think there was ever like a molecular level of evolution or life, let alone a quantum level. I think that's just JF not understanding emergence and sort of, you know, like he demonstrates that in all of his writing, that he keeps trying to locate purpose deeper and deeper, but he doesn't understand that it's holistic. So he tries to find it in the printer genes, then he goes even deeper, you know, maybe it's in a single, I don't know what, quantum wave function or something. No, it's a holistic property of a complex system, of like a set of molecules, essentially. Life is a complex emergent phenomenon that emerges out of complex chemistry and then plays by its own rules that depend on chemistry but can't be descriptively reduced to chemistry. So anyway, that's a whole other topic though. But anyway, yeah, I love this abstract biology stuff, but I don't think many people understand it. You should contact me on Discord or Twitter so we could have a discussion. Even if you don't want to talk in public, we could talk in private. I'd just be curious to find out what your background is and, you know, what you have, like how you started thinking about these things and so on. All right. I think I'm going to end it there, and I will pick this up later, and I will start going through the comments on The Ghost of Adam Lanza. As always, thanks for listening.